Hi, everybody. I'm your host, Linda Lorelle. Welcome to Our Voices Matter, a podcast dedicated to empowering us all to better understand each other. Our goal? To replace fear with knowledge, disdain with respect, and hate with love, one story at a time. So let's get to it. So I have to ask first, how's your dad?
Dad is 94 years old, hanging in there. I would say he's basically hanging in there. I've learned something as my parents aged. My mom passed away in April. That as people get old, their filters go away and their true nature shines. And my mom, as you may recall from your interviews, being around her, is pretty feisty and funny and could be a little irreverent and says the funniest things and it's kind of sometimes not the most politically correct things in the world, but she just was true, just Barbara Bush, total transparency. My dad is probably the most loving, kind-hearted, he's got the best human spirit of any human I know. He's always asking how the other guy's doing. I rubbed and said, "Dad, how you feeling today?" And he would deflect and talk, try to talk about, me or things going on. So he's a frail, old, 94-year-old man with the biggest, most loving, caring heart of any human you'll ever know.
Well, and I can only imagine how difficult these last few months have been for him since your mom passed. And I know the last time we spoke a few weeks ago, you said that one of your favorite things to do was to read to him. Talk to me about that.
Well, I read over the past 4 or more years, ever since Dad started getting sick and then Mom started getting sick and they'd go in and out of Methodist Hospital. I had made kind of a habit of going over to read to them, both in the hospital and then when they were let out and at home while they were rehabilitating. And I'm estimating that we probably have read at least 15 books over the last 4 years out loud. And we have most of them are historical novels. There's a lot about the Revolutionary War days and the forming of the nation. We've read every Bush family book that's been written. My mom's favorite books, and my favorite books actually, are from Candace Millard, who's written 3 different historical novels, beautifully written. And Mom and Dad too, but we all loved just reading these books out loud because it brought the history to life. The last book that I read, and actually my sister Dara came to town and my sister-in-law Margaret participated in the last few days of Mom's life, but we read to Mom the Barbara Bush memoir, which Mom published in 1994. And you can imagine the life they lived. My dad was a war hero, a Yale man. They met and married early in life and first love kind of thing, and then had kids and spent business life in West Texas. And there's some pretty interesting stories about that. And this whole life of public service that Mom participated in, so for her to hear this story read back to her in her words was a real blessing to both of us.
What was her reaction?
She was very interested. It brought back memories and, so my mom was alert, unlike Dad. My dad's kind of in and out. His short-term memory's not that great. He can remember the funniest things from way back. Mom remembers everything from every phase of her life. She did until she passed away. So she would add on to the story. I said, "Mom, do you remember this?" She said, "Yes." And then she'd add on to whatever little piece of the puzzle or that story might have been. Mm-hmm. She was, I think her reaction was one of gratitude that she had, that this intervention could be kind of a pleasant thing for her to look forward. She was suffering from COPD, so she couldn't move without suffering from a lack of breath. And I can't even imagine the discomfort of that condition.
Right.
And she was complaining. She never complained about. She had 6 childbirths, and so she was used to suffering through pain. And she never really complained about stuff.
Yeah.
But, you could tell she was suffering. So to be as a son and as other family members participated, to be able to play a role in her care in that personal way was really something I'm really deeply grateful for.
So, the reason that I wanted to talk to you, and really the reason that I started this podcast and to talk to all of the guests as we were chatting right before we started, we're at a really difficult moment in our nation's history. This show is not meant to be about politics, but we are living in a very contentious political time. And my goal here is really to find and share stories that remind us all of our common humanity, so that we can see in each other a little bit of ourselves, even if the person who is speaking and sharing that story is someone whom we typically might not agree with. So I'm going to ask you if you would share a story with us, either a professional or personal story, where you felt as though you were misunderstood, or you were not, you didn't belong, you felt shunned, you felt like you were labeled as the other for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I'm only a bit hesitant to talk about what I'm going to tell you, only because it's kind of self-serving and I'm going to sound very defensive. But back in the late 80s, when my dad was already elected president, the savings and loan industry was crumbling. There were laws that were made at the time that allowed savings and loan industry executives to make high-risk loans in real estate. And the federal government, looked through each of these projects. I served on the board of an institution in Denver, Colorado. We had approval for every single loan that was made at the time. And then the real estate markets in various regions in the United States went down as the oil business went down, et cetera, et cetera. So Texas suffered, Colorado suffered. Every savings and loan in the state of Colorado failed during that time. I was on the board of one of those that failed. And so there was because I was the son of the president, this is where it sounds pretty defensive, because I feel like I was scapegoated as a tool to get to my father and to diminish his chances for re-election. But because I was the son of a former president, myself and our fellow board members for Silverado Savings and Loan were brought before Congress, which was a real spectacle. And then there was an administrative hearing that focused on issues that they brought up related to my service on the board. And it was a kangaroo court type scenario. And it was hard because everyone believed that I was guilty of a crime. And there was posters put up in Washington, D.C. that, kind of like the locker up chants, like lock him up, with my picture, on posters that were put up on signs that you could see as you drove by. And I saw them. My mom and dad, who lived in Washington at the time, saw them. And it was hard for my wife in particular because, we had like 3 little kids and a stable, happy life. And that life got turned upside down because of this. Business was already, because the oil business was going down. I was in the oil business at the time. It was hard. So we ended up having to move from Colorado just to get away from the hostility. And so that was really...
How did you deal with that? What did you learn from that experience?
It's a hard thing to put in words, but I never let it bother me. And it sounds crazy because obviously probably right now sound like it did bother me, but it really didn't bother me. I lived my daily life. I exercised. I loved my kids. I was trying to be the best husband I could be, the best provider I could be, the best citizen I could be in Denver. But it was just such an overwhelming tsunami of, animus towards me that just picking up and leaving was probably it was the easy thing to do. Emotionally, it must have been draining, but I don't recall ever being depressed. I never turned to alcohol or, I didn't beat anybody.
Did you lose friends over it?
Great question. If they were truly friends, no. I don't know if there were people that might have considered themselves friends of mine that never spoke to me again because they thought I was guilty of something terrible. That's a good question. I was confronted on the streets in New York once and in Denver, Colorado 4 or 5 times by people who accosted me and got in my face and said, you're a crook, or you should be in jail, or, I don't know, give the money back, as though I had ripped them off of billions of dollars of taxpayer funds. I was actually sued, by the way, for $500 million. And I was a young father with 3 kids and a little business that was trying to do well at a downtime in the oil business. And I didn't have $1 million, not to mention $500 million. And I told my kids that when they grew up and got older, they should be, I mean, what other dad has ever been sued for $500 million? It makes you feel kind of important. You know?
in the way that you really don't want to feel important.
Yeah,
right?
well, truly no.
Right? Yeah.
But it was, anyway, the whole thing was understandable. Yeah, it didn't, I don't know that I lost friends, but I didn't change my life. I was pretty fortunate, I think, to be raised by parents that gave me a pretty solid grounding in my life. Mm-hmm. Confidence and humility and, I don't know, just qualities that wouldn't allow me to be sunken or to kind of to get off track as a result of something like this. It was kind of out of my control.
This is an interesting professional story, an example of what we're talking about here. On a personal side, I know that you, as a child, had dyslexia.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that and what that felt like as a young person.
That's another great example of maybe feeling like the other, because I'm in classrooms as a young boy where all the other students, most of the other students, I assume, could read at a grade level, appropriately for the grade level we were in. And my mother came to a 3rd grade reading session where the book was being passed around and all the kids were reading one by one. It got to me and I couldn't read the words on the page or couldn't read them coherently. And so the kid to my left intervened and helped me. The kid to the right, the teacher helped. And Mom realized, her son couldn't read. So she did everything she could over weekends to remediate me. And it did make me feel like the other in that when kids were out playing in the playground or playing pickup, baseball or whatever, I was in a reading class trying to be remediated to help. And at the time, no one really, I don't think, knew the word dyslexia as it related to learning disabilities. So yeah, that was tough. I worked harder than probably every other kid in the classroom just to keep up. And so I felt different in that way. Right. I don't recall ever being shamed. I don't recall being put down by my friends. I don't recall being cast aside. And I do remember my parents worrying very much about it and trying to intervene to help me in every way they could, especially Mom. But just to put a little happy note at the end of that chapter, sad chapter, as I grew up, I found things that interested me. So I'd start reading Sports Illustrated and sporting news. And as you develop professional interests or academic interests in college and through business school and in life, those interests are intrinsically motivating. And I found that my reading competency maybe didn't improve to where normal people could read, but I became a competent reader, and I got good grades. And at the end of my college, after a couple of years of trying to figure out how to live a good life at Tulane University, I ended up doing really well for the last couple of years, and ended up getting a master's in business in 5 years there, out of a combined program. So I don't know. I've developed a strong core belief that if you have an intrinsic motivation to do anything, you can do it well or do it competently enough to be successful.
And you can overcome whatever the obstacle might be.
Overcome the obstacle. Mm-hmm. My brother George is sets a good role model for that in some ways. And this is kind of off the topic, but he became an artist without having any artistic skills because he put his mind to it. And now he paints, and he's using his painting in a very philanthropic and incredible way, and brings him joy and comfort and peace. But he's really gotten pretty. If he can become, a great artist, or, then we can do anything.
Then anything's possible, right?
Yes. If he can become president, we could be anything.
Yeah. I don't think he's going to appreciate hearing that.
I think he would. I don't know. My brother, when he was 16, went to Andover. Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, so he was away from home. He'd come home. My brother Marvin, who was 6 and I was 8 at the time, would do anything to get him to play with us. And so one night he said, okay, I'll play with you. He pulled out a BB gun, and we had a long hallway on Briar Drive in Houston, Texas, in our house. And he said, okay, I'm going to count to 10. So I went first, and I started running as fast as I could, and he shot me in my ass. I was and so when people say, what's it like to have a father that was president and a brother that was president? I said, look, my dad, it was a fulfillment of an expectation. He's my hero, and he's got this amazing, he leans in with love, he's wise, and he's competent. But my brother shot me in my ass as a kid. It's like, I can't imagine him being president.
And yet,
only in America.
Only in America.
Donald Trump and George
Okay,
Bush.
that's a great segue. That's a great segue because America's in kind of a we're having some serious issues right now. Tell me what you're doing right now professionally, and I know some of what you're doing is taking you overseas to China and other parts of the world. I'm curious about what kinds of conversations you're having in a business setting and personal overseas as it relates to what's going on in our country right now.
Yeah. Well, inevitably, people express concern about how divided our country's become. I'm deeply concerned by it. I don't like the tone. I don't like the demagoguery. I don't like the pure political nature of some of the words that are spoken and some of the content of the dialogue. I'm very discouraged, with this divide and conquer and bully type mentality in politics. And it's not just our current president. There are others that practice it as well. And it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats as well. Having said that, I could never have imagined in my wildest dreams, having been a part of 2 presidencies in my family, that there could be a president who could be so disrespectful of the office of the presidency in the way he treats other people. The United States is kind of the symbol to the world of benevolence and respectfulness and humility in doing good for others. And this president's kind of taken that whole image and shattered it and kind of made it all about us, America first. And it's all about him as a person. And I did this and I did that. And this, my dad, who I've already shared with you, is very frail. Occasionally we commiserate over the fact that this office is now being shattered or being kind of spoiled by this rotten behavior. And who cares whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you believe in, tax cuts or not, or, big deficits or big military spending, whatever the issue is, it's not about issues to me, because I think we could have had a more effective president be president, but then we're not talking about politics. We're talking about basic human qualities of, respectfulness of others and projecting love and kindness. There's nothing wrong with leading with love. And yet there seems to be no love, and it's yet in the dialogue, and it's discouraging that more people don't call it out, that don't speak the truth about leaning in with love. Don't you find that really disappointing?
That's the whole reason I'm doing this show.
Yeah.
So for the last couple of years, since the 2016 election, when the divide really got even wider. I was thinking to myself, what can I, as an individual,
I love that you're doing
do?
This.
Thank you.
It's great, seriously.
Well, it really has affected me in a very deep level, like it has so many millions of Americans, and I just feel like we all have to do whatever it is we can do on an individual level. And I think at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is having conversations like this. It's reminding people that we're all human. We all have frailties. None of us is perfect,
Right.
But we all deserve respect. We have to give respect in order to receive it. We just have to get back to a real basic level, because everything is happening up here at the political level.
Right.
But I think that it's gonna be at the grassroots level, with people sitting around, coffee tables and having conversations like this, when we finally get back to knowing and understanding each other.
Right. So I wake up every day with 2 core beliefs. One is that every human is born with the same potential for being civilized and realizing fullest potential. And sadly, too many people are born on the wrong side of the tracks, or with the wrong set of resources, or the wrong set of mentors, or in the wrong conditions. So they don't realize their fullest potential. I believe everyone has a potential to realize a God-given ability that's often not achieved, not because of their own fault, but because of circumstances that can be changed, with the environment they're in. Two, I believe government isn't positioned to solve our problems. That this political discourse that's creating disharmony and division among people and races and economic brackets and all these things, that the government can't solve that problem, but that people, rolling up their sleeves and taking responsibility in their own communities, or taking responsibility for their own neighbor. And this gets to my dad's, proclamation back 30 years ago about points of light, that there are thousands of organizations around the United States in every community for every problem in America. The problem's being solved by some group somewhere, oftentimes powered by volunteers. And we need to take our democracy. My view is we need to take our democracy back. We can't wait for Washington or Austin or state capitals to fix our problems. People have the potential to solve the problem in their community, to lift that little kid that's suffering because he doesn't have books in his home, by providing books, or helping them with mentoring and tutoring, or helping the elderly, that doesn't have the advantages. We can take that responsibility in our own hands. And the beauty of that, Linda, which gets right to the heart of your and my core concern, is that serving others unites us as a people. It brings out our basic humanity, which is naturally designed to attract us to one another, to find,
and no better example of that than Harvey.
Yeah.
Okay.
Harvey,
Maria, Florence, all of them. But we lived Harvey.
Right.
We lived Harvey in this community, and people didn't
Right.
ask what's your political affiliation before they brought the boat up to the door to help get you out of harm's way.
Exactly.
So it's,
Right.
why can't we be like that
You're
when
right.
we're not in a disaster situation? That's what we have to get back to.
So on a national basis, when Dad talked about Points of Light, there were 32 million Americans volunteering at some time during a given year. Today, there are 64 million Americans volunteering. They volunteer with more hours and with higher impact than they did 30 years ago. So there's a trend and a movement. More corporations are recruiting, young professionals to a culture of within the company of being able to serve the community where they work. So that's the thing that attracts and retains, more young people in the corporate environment. So there are some hopeful and very positive trends if you look at the big national trend. And young people like my son, Pierce, who runs the biggest Big Brothers Big Sisters organization in the United States, and is a mentor to this great little kid, Jalen, who was a little kid, now he's a sophomore in high school. So many people are making a huge difference, and there's some great examples of it among the youth, which is a very hopeful thing for me.
Absolutely. Okay, let's switch gears now to one other thing that I know you're spending a lot of time overseas in China.
Yeah.
So share with our audience what you're doing in China.
Well, first of all, my first visit to China was in 1975. China was in the dark days of the Cultural Revolution. Chairman Mao was the authoritarian, communist leader. There were no freedoms. People couldn't choose where to live. They had two colors of Mao suits that they wore, gray and blue. It was like very dark. They burned coal, so the air was polluted. Everything about China was kind of miserable in 1975. And so to see China through its open door policy adopt, market incentives and motivation or whatever to grow their economy to now where it's the second largest economy in the world. You could never have dreamt that being possible 43 years ago. And so to see them do that, there have been hundreds of millions of people lifted out of poverty in China over the past 40 years. There have been people enjoying more freedoms than you could have ever dreamt possible 40 years ago. It's been the biggest freedom movement on the face of the planet. in all of time, because they're such a huge country. So the numbers are large. And freedom-loving people around the world should be celebrating this rise. And yet there's a thesis, Linda, which is what concerns me, called the Thucydides trap, where over the past 500 years, somebody did a study, and when there's an established power that faces a rising power, and China's perceived to be a rising power, 12 out of the 16 times that's been documented over the past 500 years have ended in war. And so there's this concern that their rise is going to force us as the established power to confront them in a conflict. And it's
you think there's a real possibility of that?
I think people that are ill-informed, who view China's rise as a threat, could possibly pull the trigger or do something stupid, or engage in a conflict. The rhetoric we're hearing today out of Washington among congressmen and senators, the president, the vice president, is kind of leaning in that direction, as though, but China's rise is actually an opportunity for the world. We share, this gets back to your theme, we share a common humanity. Chinese people send hundreds of thousands of students to America every year. They're educated here. They're indoctrinated in our ways. They aspire to live like Americans. They want fresh air. They want freedom. They want opportunities to raise their kids in a good environment. They don't need to be a democracy like we do. Not every country has the conditions for a vibrant democracy. In fact, I wonder whether our democracy really works, to see machine guns being used in schools and synagogues and all over the place. It's crazy that we don't have a more vibrant democracy that rejects these kinds of terrible conditions that we live in, where we have so much poverty and teenage pregnancy rates and violent crimes. I mean, our democracy is failing in so many ways. Anyway, most countries aren't set to have a vibrant voting-like democracy, and China's system has allowed it to lift people out of poverty, create an environment where freedom, and they aspire to be like us, so we should embrace this movement. And yet in America, we allow politicians who are ill-informed, and maybe others that are influencers, tell us the Chinese rise represents a threat. We're creating an enemy out of a natural ally. And it's shameful, and it's terrible for the future of the world. We have human needs. This is another thing I think about every day I wake up. There are huge needs for humanity to sustain life on Earth. We have an Earth that needs to be protected. We have a growing population. We have 7.2 billion people today. It's going to grow to 9.8 billion by 2050. How are we going to feed those people? How are we going to provide health care for those people? How is all the environmental conditions going to be sustained so that life on Earth can be comfortable, and that we can enjoy God's beautiful design of it? And so it's going to take every nation and every human in every nation to work in our common interests and our common humanity to solve these problems.
And yet we seem to be moving in the opposite direction. We, America.
Yeah. Seem to be disengaging from the
Right.
world. We're dropping out of climate control. We're doing all these things that are just the antithesis of what we should be doing. We should be leading, and we should be welcoming others. My dad, I think one of the proudest things I would say about Dad's presidential leadership and his leadership throughout his life is he always recruited others to help. In the Gulf War, he didn't do it alone. We weren't the world's one police. He convinced the Congress, he convinced the UN, he convinced the world that we needed a coalition to kick Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. He attacked a helpless little nation, and he righted a wrong. He did the same thing in working for the Americans with Disabilities Act. He did the same thing by raising taxes and cutting spending. You have to work with people to solve human conditions or challenges, and we need to get back to that.
So as it relates to what you're doing in China, what are you doing to help move us toward what you just articulated?
So my dad started a conference in 2003 called the Bush-China-U.S. Relations Conference. And he brought together stakeholders. He held, while he was physically able, he held 5 different conferences over like 15 years. He's no longer capable of doing that, so he handed the reins over to me. So in 2015, we had a conference on the topic of infectious disease, where we brought stakeholders from the US and China together to talk about, in the case of an outbreak of SARS or Ebola, how can our governments, how can our nonprofits, how can our corporations work together to respond to it so that human suffering is reduced and we control the spread of a pandemic kind of thing. And it was really successful, and people from both sides thought it was productive. So I'm continuing this conference. I'm going to give you a little sneak preview of something that's going to be announced later.
Okay,
So
great. Are we breaking news?
We're breaking
Breaking news.
Breaking
I love
news.
it.
So I had formed the Bush-China-U.S. Relations Foundation with Dad's blessing like a year and a half ago. The University of Texas, where there's no real George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush or Bush family legacy, institutional interest, has agreed in the LBJ school, which is interesting, the public policy, to change the name of their China Public Policy Center to the George H.W. Bush Center for U.S.-China Relations. It's run by a fabulous China expert, a guy named David Firestein. He's got a good team there. So it's going to be a university level presidential legacy type platform for doing kind of putting this conference on that we're talking about for 2018, which will be the seventh such conference.
2019.
I'm sorry, 19, because 18 is out. And we're going to have other programmatic activities, some kind of back channel type things, but other more visible type things. But we're going to try to be, through David's leadership and through the center's leadership, a place where dialogue can be held, where the central kind of element of it that's important is there's going to be civility in the dialogue. So it'll have the George Herbert Walker Bush type of respectfulness of one another. You can be able to air sharply different opinions or similar opinions, whatever the opinion spectrum might be, but we're going to do it with respectfulness and civility. And I'm really excited about having this UT platform now for a Bush family legacy, and especially one that's so critically important at this particular time. To avoid war and to build an alliance, we need to have a voice that's reasonable, that brings people together to find our common interests.
Exactly. So when is the conference in 2019?
It's probably going to be, we don't have the date. It's going to be in August. We're going to time it for the big coming out party for the center. So I'm giving you like a big preview.
Okay. So will it be at the center or
the center is actually is an office. There's no real center. The center, the center is the LBJ school basically. Okay. So it'll be in Austin. Okay. You'll be the first to know.
Thank you very much. I love having the scoop. That's fantastic. So as we wrap this up, I want to ask you, what do you think, when you think about, and you were so candid in talking about the savings and loan situation and what you went through there, and what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about you? And the reason that I'm asking, and I'm going to ask this of all of our guests, is just that...
I'll tell you what it is.
Okay, go.
Well, you can tell me why you want to ask.
No, I'm asking because I just think that people decide, or they have a perception of what somebody is. Yeah. And it's not always the truth. And often that perception is born of ignorance. They just don't know.
Yeah. And so in my case, I get this all the time. So when I engage in dialogue with people that don't know me, they come with preconceived expectations for what I must be like.
Right.
And because I'm come from a Republican, conservative, blah, 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 blah family, they might think I'm not, I'm anti-gay, or that I'm, so they label you before even meeting me. Right. Or that I'm spoiled, or that I'm elitist, or something. And people oftentimes openly express surprise at how normal or they're just surprised that I'm not a stuck up, that I've got a big, huge, giant ego that I'm kind of driving. And I think people think I fly in a private plane and have limos.
You
driving
don't?
No. Do you?
No.
Someday we will.
You drove yourself here this morning.
I did. Good things happen to good people. You never know. But I think there's an expectation that people think that we are somehow privileged. And I'll tell you, Mom would never allow that.
And you wear your emotions on your sleeve. I mean, I've interviewed you many times,
I do.
and
I
I was going to say, I don't think we've ever got through an interview when you haven't teared up talking about something, because you clearly
I did pretty well today up until this moment.
You did.
Thank you for
You
getting
did. But you're very passionate, and especially when you're talking about your family and Mom in particular. So I really appreciate you being so candid and open and honest. And if there's one thing that you could leave people with today that would give them hope for our future as a nation in terms of bringing us back together, what would that be?
I think what brings us together is much more powerful than what divides us. I think the human nature of finding common ground, of looking for the best in others, of serving others, is a more powerful force than the negative forces that are out there. And there's evidence of growing numbers of people who are serving, so you can document it. And I really do hold out high hopes for our country, for the world, for humanity, that people generally have good hearts.
Well, I think by sharing your story and sharing the other stories and having all of our voices out there, we'll get there.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for this great mission of yours.
Thank you so much, Neil. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for sharing this time with us, for giving our guests permission to speak, and for having the courage to listen with an open mind. I'm Linda Lorelle, reminding you that our voices matter.